Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this very special evening. It's what we called a special evening with a timely relevance. We called it The Death of Stalin, the Untold Purim Story. It's fascinating that being so close to Purim, and obviously what's going on in the world, that we could actually have this conversation tonight. But before we get started, what we're going to do is begin this evening with a prayer for our brothers and sisters and those who are in Ukraine who need our prayers most right now. We're going to say chapter 20 of Tehillim together. I'll put it up on the screen for you. You can join me as we recite this prayer in honor of our brothers and sisters in Ukraine. Lamnatseach mizmar leDavid yancha Adonai biyom tzara yisagev chashim lehe Yaakov. Yishach ezrecha mikodesh umetzini tzedeka yiskar kol minchotecha v'yalatcha yadash nasela yitin lecha chivavecha v'choatzatcha yimale niranana b'shuatecha uv'shem leheinu nidgal yimale Adonai kol mishavatecha at yadaiti ki yoshia Adonai mishicho yaneu mishmei kadsho b'gvurat yesh yamino elev harechev ve'elev asusim v'anachnu b'shem Adonai Eloheinu nazkir hemakarev v'nafalu v'anachnu kamnu v'nitodad Adonai Hoshea melech yanenu v'yom karenu. For the conductor, a song of David. May the Lord answer you on a day of distress. May the name of the God of Jacob fortify you. May he send your aid from his sanctuary, and may he support you from Zion. May he remember all of your meal offerings, and may he accept your fat burnt offerings forever. May he give you as your heart desires. May he fulfill all your counsel, and let us sing praises for your salvation, and let us assemble in the name of our God. May the Lord fulfill all your requests. Now I know that the Lord saved his anointed. He answered him from his holy heavens with the mighty acts of salvation from his right hand. These thrust in chariots and these in horses, but we mention the name of the Lord our God. They kneel and fall, but we rise and gain strength. O Lord, save us. May the King answer us on the day we call. And may our brothers and sisters who are right now stuck in places of which we cannot be of physical support to them. We can only be of spiritual support to them. May they be able to hear our call, and may Hashem hear our call and deliver them and enter us in an era of peace. So tonight we begin with a bit of a history lesson to give you a little bit of the background of a story that you may not be aware of. And I'm going to invite Rabbi Yosh to join me this evening and to begin our lesson and our conversation.
Pleasure to see everybody tonight. Perhaps not literally see. On that note, feel free to, if you're able to, feel free to go and open your camera. It helps me with feedback. Hello, right? Nice to see you. Helps me with feedback, and whenever you're teaching, you see a lot from people's reaction, if they understand, if they have a question, and it helps me get cues to help have a more interesting class for you guys. All right. So that being said, tonight we'll go, like Rabbi Bernath said, we'll talk a little history, then we'll talk a little Kabbalah. But of course, why are we doing this class now? The context, so the motivation behind giving this class was that, if you look at the situation we've been in for the past 2 years, it's kind of like out of the frying pan and into the fire. So here we are emerging from a pandemic. Spring is coming for us in Montreal. Weather's starting to warm up. We're looking forward to maybe having a bit of a normal life again for up here, as is most of the world. And from that, we're kind of, once again embroiled in a worldwide kind of struggle right fresh out of this pandemic. And so it brings a question, at least for me, when I was kind of struggling with all of that, when I was dealing with all that, for me, the question became, what is our role? What can we do? You feel kind of powerless. You see these kind of things going on in the world. And, from a certain perspective, it feels kind of like, well, we're powerless to do anything, and, all these terrible things happening. And so for me, this class is a little bit of a way of fighting back. And it's also a way that we can fight back together by looking at, some other times in history when people were being pushed around, where people were under the control of events and people and leaders, that were way beyond them. And, and the Jewish people were in a lot of trouble, and, what they did and how that worked out. And so we decided to pick, we have Purim, that's the time of year we're at, and how it relates to the death of Stalin. It's all kind of interconnected with this time of year. And so we thought it very appropriate. But the ultimate point of having this discussion isn't just academic. It's not just to talk about the history. It's not just to, to do a class. It's also to instruct us and for us to have something to move forward on. This is, biyamim hahem bizman hazeh. In those days and in our time, this is something that we can use, we can learn from to help us with the situation that the world is in right now. So that's kind of the motivation behind this, and that's where the whole point of this. So first of all, the history. First, where this comes from. So all right, I'm going to try this. I don't know if, let's see. I'll throw questions out there. I'm going to pretend we're in a room and we're all together. I'm going to pretend this is a regular class. That's how I do it when I teach online. So I'm just going to throw things out there like I would in a normal class and let people talk for a minute, answer questions. So has anybody ever heard of something called the doctor's plot towards the, and towards the early 50s, the early 1950s in Soviet Russia, the doctor's plot, or the doctor's, anyone? Feel free to say no also. Okay, yeah. I see Celeste saying no. I see Brian saying no. They have the camera on. Thank you guys. I like that. A little feedback. Yeah. Valerie in the chat. Andrea. Okay. So, as it's kind of one of the funny features of the Soviet Union is that there are all kinds of miracle stories and all kinds of wild stories that happen that we only found out years later. If you ever heard the story of, there's the famous story of the guy who averted, nuclear war by not pressing the button because he didn't believe the radars. And all stories came out years later, but we didn't know all these wild things, all these miracles that happened in the Soviet Union. So here's one of them. So it's not particularly well studied, but we all know about the Holocaust from 1939 to 1945. Everybody knows exactly what that is here. I don't have to explain it. But not everyone knows what happened afterwards in the Soviet Union. So the Soviet Union, after World War II, during World War II and before World War II, right, the Soviet Union had a bunch of different leaders, and Josef Stalin, the subject, from the title of tonight's class, obviously became very powerful. I don't think I need to elaborate on who he was with all of you. I don't know if we have to go too much into it, but everybody knows he was a paranoid, he was a paranoid dictator, an autocrat, a real, mass murderer, as it turned out. Not everybody was aware at the time. He was, if you imagine Kim Jong-un now in North Korea and the way they're kind of like brainwashed in an information, through information to kind of, idolize a leader, right? That's what Joseph Stalin was. Literally, he was kind of like put up as an idol for the people. It was, even the people he persecuted, it was like so ingrained in people. It was kind of like, for some people, even after he died, even though they had very difficult lives under him, it was kind of like they couldn't believe it. They'd been trained to think that he cared about each and every person, and he was like their father. He was literally the father figure of the whole country. It was this, it was this like really incredible information propaganda that was, kind of brainwashed people into believing that. So, this was a man with, the leader of, let's call it, the Soviet Union, incredible unlimited power, and everybody was afraid of him. And he was an incredibly paranoid person. So, the history of Russia, the Soviet Union, so Stalin started these things called purges, where he, just get rid of huge amounts of people, perceived political enemies, people who were elevated, people who were leaders one day would be taken out to be executed the next. And that went on for a good decade. He attained a kind of a hero status also by the defense against the German invasion in World War II. Stalin, that's another way he kind of created this mythos about himself, the great defender of Russia. So after World War II, he was this kind of impossible to take down leader. Now, does this sound familiar? You guys are starting to see some parallels here, right? Now, history kind of repeats itself. Somebody's in power for decades and, seems impossible to take down, incredibly paranoid, behaves strangely. It's, history does tend to repeat itself if you pay attention, right? So, and what was he up? So what is he up to? So there's if you read firsthand accounts, and I have read some firsthand accounts from Jewish people, especially, the people who look Jewish. There weren't very many, in the early 50s in the Soviet Union anymore, but people who still, wore any kind of, Hasidic garb or anything like that, or a kippah, almost unheard of. But, firsthand accounts from that time, even if, or someone had a Jewish name, everybody knew who was Jewish in those days, people had Jewish names. And the firsthand accounts are kind of like, after World War II and after, Zionism in 1948 and the birth of Israel, anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union really reached a fever pitch. And there's a lot of reasons about why. Why in a socialist paradise where everybody's supposed to be equal and racism isn't supposed to exist anymore, and all, the people there are supposed to be comrades. How is it that, how come they're persecuting the Jews? Okay, it's a very complicated question, but we'll treat it just for a minute or two. But what it really comes down to is that people testify that it was in 1951, 1952 is getting to be dangerous to be Jewish. It was like the old days with the pogroms again. From the old Tsarist regime. It was, the judges were against you, the police were against you, the bus driver was spitting at you. If somebody beat you up, nobody cared. That was kind of like what it was like to be Jewish at that time. A lot of people, have testified. I've read those. You can feel free to check them out. Different articles that were written about this. So, and this was quite intentional. This was a buildup of a few years that Stalin was building up this kind of very strong propaganda case against Jews. The way he did it, he started off doing it. He didn't talk about Jews at first. He used like coded language. Okay, it's good to know this because this coded language has become part of our politics today, and a lot of the tactics used by the anti-Semites on the left side of the political spectrum, and on the right side to some extent, but mostly on the left, they use these tactics as well. They use these words and these ideas, or, it's good to know what they are. So the idea, Stalin called it the Ruthless Cosmopolitan. That was the dog whistle for Jew, a rootless cosmopolitan, somebody who, is this person who lives in the city and is, quite suave and well-to-do and is rootless, is just kind of like a citizen of the world, has no allegiance to his or her country. So they, and then it started talking about the Zionists. All right, this should all be familiar if you're looking at politics today. It's not Jews, it's Zionists. They were talking about the Zionists and the Zionist conspiracy, and that was considered anti-Soviet. that was considered to be anti-communist, and like Zionists were enemy number one. 1948, it didn't go the way Stalin wanted it to. Israel didn't become his vassal state. It didn't become part of the Soviet Union like he wanted. And he was just, that became like a crime to be a Zionist. So, so, it built up this kind of this slow propaganda, and then it slowly developed into talking about, Jews specifically. Something in Czechoslovakia happened, which where a bunch of the leaders of the country, many of whom were Jewish, and it was a really anti-Semitic kind of case that was brought against them. Many of them were executed. That Czechoslovakia, part of the Soviet Union, and it was, the signs were there that something was wrong. There was a plan. Something was happening here, and it culminated in what was known as the doctor's plot. I asked you, what I mentioned earlier. So first of all, okay, I just gave you a lot of information. Has anybody heard of this whole thing before? This is not something that's really talked about, right? Right? Anybody? Anyone have any experiences, heard stories, any information on this? Feel free to jump in, or is this totally new information, or something that you've never kind of discussed or heard discussed before? Feel free to give me some.
This is new for me. And in doing some family research, there's a lot of places that I got stuck. The Eastern European, Jewish family members would splinter and disappear. So that's the only feeling I got, is that there was a lot going on in a lot of different places.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Any other feedback on this? Something you've heard before? Is this new? Are you surprised by this? Or anybody heard any stories about this kind of thing? All right, no, nobody, fine. We'll keep going. All right, so the culmination of this whole kind of few years simmering propaganda war, and look, it wasn't hard to do. There was a lot of anti-Semitism hardwired into people from their families and from their it was incredibly common. It was part of the traditional Christian anti-Semitism, the pre-revolution, Tsarist kind of pogrom style thing. The world was a very racist place then. Also, it just was everywhere. United States, Canada, Europe, everywhere was just very, very racist. It was like race was a really big thing. So this was kind of hardwired into people. It wasn't difficult to convince them. So the culmination of this kind of propaganda war against Jews was something called the doctor's plot. The doctor's plot was an accusation that Stalin made against his 9 top kind of doctors who took care of, maintained people's health at the Kremlin, himself and all these other big shots. And as it happened, 6 of these 9 doctors were Jewish. And so there's this accusation that they were trying to misdiagnose and kind of slowly, subtly destroy the health of Stalin himself and other leaders, and trying to, kind of slowly poison them or kill them by, just kind of slowly messing up their health diagnoses and things like that. So very difficult to prove one way or the other, which is, useful, if anything, for a thing like this, a show trial that they were trying to do. And obviously they kind of blamed it on a cabal, the Zionist, some sort of plot, and the Joint Distribution Committee, which was this kind of charitable American thing that was also part of it, right? They made this whole story, the kind of Jewish conspiracy to kill Stalin or, get rid of him and all these other people. So, things got really bad. There's, firsthand accounts that I've read, things got really bad. And it was like a powder keg. And as a Jewish person, you almost felt like a pogrom was going to happen. So unbeknownst to everybody, now there's no clear evidence of this. I just want to what I'm going to tell you now is conjecture, because it never happened, and that's kind of the miracle that we believe. It's a conjecture. There weren't any clear documents on this. There's no smoking gun ever found for what I'm about to tell you, but it's there's a lot of testimony about it, a lot of people from the government who talked about it, and it was discussed. What was the plan here? What was really going on here with this whole years-long campaign, and with this whole doctor's plot, and the Jewish angle of it. So there were around 2 million Jewish people in the Soviet Union, which is a large percentage of the Jewish people worldwide. But when you're talking about for someone like Stalin to get rid of or to deport or whatever, he had a gulag system that had seen hundreds of thousands of people. He either intentionally or through neglect starved millions of Ukrainians in the 30s. The Holodomore, it's called, gaining some renewed attention now because of the war there. People talk about the history. If you haven't heard of that, you can look it up. It's called the Holodomore. And he had the power, he had the absolute power and capability to do massive, incredible things, large numbers of people. And so there's this, already, quite a few years earlier, there's this part of Eastern Russia, Boroboyarsk, I think it's called. It's very funny, when Zionism was starting to catch on, decades earlier, Stalin had created this kind of area. He said, I'm going to create my own Jewish autonomous region where Jews can move. And he created this area like near China, honestly, like way out to the east. And it's a paradise. And to this day, it's a Jewish autonomous area whose primary language, official language, is Yiddish. It's a real place. I can share some pictures if you want, or we can put it up after. And there's even a rabbi who he was born there, and he came back to be. There's a Chabad rabbi, there's a Chabad house, kosher food. Some Jews who live out there. It's they have Yiddish signs, and but it's near China. So the idea of kind of creating a Jewish settlement in the far reaches of Siberia or Eastern Russia was a real idea. It's something that he had pitched before, and in the third, they were trying to get people to move there. There were even some Jews from North America, and this paradise, this Zionist dream of the Jews having their own little autonomous area. People moved there, and when they found the frozen, terrible landscape, they were very disappointed, to say the least. It didn't come as advertised, so that was already a thing. And there's a real possibility that people testify that Stalin's plan was to do that, but on a much grander scale. Was to kind of say, for the Jews' own protection, that they're going to be killed by their neighbors, that there's so much anti-Jewish sentiment now. So for their own protection, we're going to move them out. We're going to get the trains ready, and we're going to move them out to an area out east. And they were building barracks out there. They were building like kind of little city, building like a little city, a barracks to hold people. And they were going to slowly, they were going to move the 2 million Soviet Jews to these regions in Siberia. And then, you'd have some people die on the trip. You'd have some people die of starvation. And, over a few years, the idea was you would kind of basically destroy Soviet Jewry, much like Hitler had in the Holocaust. And so that was, you can read more about this if you'd like. There's there's a Wikipedia page on it and discussions. Thank you, Andrew, for posting, about the Wikipedia here. That's the Wikipedia link, I think. Yeah, the Jewish Autonomous Oblast. There's also a page specifically about this plan. We'll pull it up later if you'd like, and the back and forth of it. But yeah, so what do we got there? Thanks, Rabbi. What do we got? Die Regierung von der Jiddischer Autonomer Gegend. There you go. This is the official, all the signs in this place are in Yiddish. Birobidzhan. There's a big menorah outside the train station or in the main square. There's a big menorah out there. This is a real place in Eastern Russia near China. This actually exists. Any other cool pictures out there? There's a whole bunch. There it is, right on the border with China. There, yeah. Way out east. Really like in the middle of nowhere. Way out east near the Pacific Ocean.
For those that is it okay if I just jump in, or would you rather me chat?
No, I'd love people to jump in. Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. So for the Jewish people that went there and survived, what was their means of survival? How did they, set up settlement in such a hostile looking place?
Yeah, well, there some agriculture was possible. How many people a place can support depends on the level of agriculture that's possible, especially in a place like the Soviet Union, where even in cities in the best of times, there wasn't necessarily a lot of food for your average person. So, this whole idea of the agrarian, kind of like, people going and working on farms, that was like all, that was a big part of the communist idea. So, but yeah, tough landscape. So yeah, some people, there's, I think I saw an article, the Jewish community, a few thousand people, in a city, there's people who live out there. There's people who live there, it's not like a completely barren place. It's just, it's not exactly, it's not the world's most fertile ground, and it's not the most welcoming place in the winter, I'm sure. Yeah, there's the sign, the welcome to Bir Bijan in Yiddish and in Russian. Leningas. So the street signs there are actually in Yiddish. Yeah, synagogue. Anyway, that was kind of like a just a proof of concept, that was the idea that this idea was possible. But the fact that the conjecture, let's say, that he was going to deport 2 million Jewish people out there and slowly starve them to death, that's major conjecture. That would explain the doctor's plot, and it would explain all the kind of anti-Jewish propaganda that he had been building up there, and what it was all about. Everything was with a plan. So what stopped it? How do you, this guy has absolute power. No one in Russia is going to stop him. In 1953, by now, Russia is already a nuclear power. Nobody's invading Russia to stop them. It's not happening, right? Nuclear power with a literal crazy, paranoid, insane megalomaniac with his finger on the button. Who could stop him? Scary situation, I don't know. You find yourself asking yourself that question now, right? That question, who's going to stop him? Right? That's an emotion or feeling that's come up a lot. So let's look at the story, what happened. All right. So let's jump to something completely different, actually, first. We're going to jump to Purim. Purim, 1953. That year was the night of February 28th and the day of March 1st, 1953. Okay, right in the heart, this is just a few weeks before the show trial of these mostly Jewish doctors is supposed to take place. And we're going to jump over to New York City, Brooklyn, Crown Heights, which at that time was not exactly what it is today. If you've ever been to Crown Heights, or if you've heard about it, right, today it's this huge Lubavitch, Chabad community, the central community. You have the ginormous 770 Central Chabad Synagogue, and you have thousands and thousands of Chabad families who live there, and huge schools and all that kind of stuff. That's what it is today. For anybody who's visited, I know some people here who I've taken there before or who know about it. That's what it was. In 1953, it didn't look like that. In 1953, it was actually a kind of upper middle class, regular Jewish neighborhood, all different kinds of people, religious, not religious, Hasidic, not Hasidic, all different kinds of people. It was like a very nice neighborhood, a lot of beautiful houses, and one of the many communities that lived there with a very, very small, this little, this picturesque little house with a tiny little synagogue in it was, Lubavitch Rebbe, the Rebbe we know, from all the pictures, the Lubavitch Rebbe. So he was a kind of a young man at the time. He was only, the Rebbe was only a few years into his leadership. This is only 3 years after his father-in-law, who had led the movement for 30 years before that, had just passed away a few years earlier, 1950. And this is 1953. And you have to picture the scene, Purim. If you've ever been to a real Purim gathering, people are drinking, it's very happening, very powerful. So this is a Purim situation, rented hall, I believe. I think Rabbi Bernath, you can find, I think there's a famous picture that was printed, or there's one picture somebody took that for Brangen, if you could find it, just to give the impression, or give the, see if you can find it if it comes up, but to give the mood, right? So for Brangen, as a get together, drinking, singing, the Rebbe would speak words of Torah. He would, give over the structure of a Farbrengen was that the Rebbe would speak and they would sing and see the. Is that it? Is that the one?
It's not the one, but it's a couple years right
now. Gives you a good idea.
It gives you an idea because it's just a few years after.
Yeah, that's a good idea of the kind of size of it, the people stuck together. It looks like the Rebbe there is actually saying a discourse. That's why everybody's kind of at attention. Can't tell, actually. But yeah. So you can imagine that, just a lot more drinking, a little more festive, Purim. But yeah, and a very intense atmosphere, though. Really, really intense atmosphere. So the Rebbe would speak, he would say, and then they would sing, and he would speak, and they would sing. And then he would kind of indicate that it was time to say over an original Hasidic discourse, which is the unique kind of thing that a Rebbe does. He says he delivers, unique and original Hasidic thoughts. And there's a whole special song that's sung beforehand. And there's a whole special way it's done. And it's a very kind of otherworldly experience. And then that would happen, I think that's the one.
That's the,
no,
that's
the
it.
Sukkah. That's the one.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I haven't seen it, but I heard about this. Yeah. That is the Farbrengen in a rented place, kind of, you can see, so there, the more festive atmosphere, you can see, the bottles on the table, people smiling, people laughing, people hanging off the rafters, literally. People literally hanging off the rafters. Hey, it's my dad. Hey, Dad. Welcome to the class. So there it is. Yeah, 1953, the Rebbe von Purim. Beautiful. Just so much happening in that picture. So, okay, fine. So it's late. It's, middle of the night, sometime in the morning. And the Rebbe had already said this, had already delivered one discourse. And, the rule is one Farbrengen, one gathering, got one discourse, when all of a sudden, something completely unexpected happened. The Rebbe started to tell a story. Just stopped everything. So I have a story to tell you guys. And this was the story. The story was that in the few years, the story took place in the few years. This is a story within a story now, right? Following? Let me know if you're not following. I'll go back and review. Okay. If anyone has any trouble following, let me know. This is a story within a story. This is the story that the Rebbe is telling at this Farbrengen. In the years between 1917, 1920, between the Russian Revolution and the Russian Revolution and the Bolshevik Revolution, in that time, the overthrow of the Tsar, there was at one point, there were elections in Russia. There were elections, the part of their whole revolutionary process. At one point, there were these elections for the first time. People were very excited. Obviously, this is like a new age in Russia. And the leader of Chabad at that time, who lived in Russia, was the was the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Shalom Ber. We call him the Rebbe Rashab, the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe, who passed away in 1920. So this is between the end of his life in 1917. That's what I said, 1917, 1920. Anyway, story takes place. Just a cute little story that almost as a joke that Hasidim would say amongst themselves. So the Rebbe Rashab told all of the Hasidim that they need to go vote. And he said, obviously he told them who to vote for, So there was one old Chassid, who didn't know or care for politics. He didn't know who any of these people running was. Didn't matter to him. He lived in a different world. He lived in the spiritual world. But the Rebbe said to vote, so he's going to go vote. The Rebbe said to vote for this candidate, so he's going to go vote for that candidate for whatever good for it's going to bring. But when one is doing something that the Rebbe instructed you to do, it's a very holy thing. Doesn't matter what it is. So he went to the mikvah, he immersed himself in the mikvah, he got dressed in his very fine Shabbos clothes, put on his Hasidic gartel, his belt, put on his hat, got all dressed like it was the Shabbat or the holidays, and he, very dignifiedly goes and, with deep meditation, goes to the voting station and does whatever he has to do to vote. And carries it out with due diligence and reverence for carrying out the Rebbe's instructions. And as he gets out of the polling station, he sees a bunch of Russian peasants who have gotten to vote for the first time in their lives. They're all very excited, and so they're dancing and singing around the polling station, cheering for their candidate, and they're saying in Russian, instead of hooray, you say hoorah. They're saying hoorah, 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 dancing around. But the Rebbe actually did that. He said hoorah, hoorah. And the Chassid saw this, and he thought it was pretty funny, because in Hebrew, hoorah means he is wicked. He is wicked. And the Chassid thought to himself, yeah, that's right. This candidate, this person who you're all cheering for, he's probably wicked. He's wicked. So the Chassid started to sing also, hoorah, hoorah, he is wicked, he is wicked, the way he thought of it. So as the Rebbe, jumping back to the Farbrengen now in 1953, as the Rebbe's telling the story, he over and over says, hoorah, and the whole crowd catches on. They say, okay, they all do it along with him. They're all going, hoorah, this whole screen, this whole room is yelling and screaming, he is wicked, he is wicked. And you can see, if you go back to that picture that Rabbi Bernath posted before, you can imagine, you can picture what that looked like in that room, what that moment looked like. There are still some people, there are people alive now who were actually there, who could probably tell the story. Not many, right? 1953, to be old enough to be here, one of those chosen few. This is 70 years ago now, just 69 years ago. But you can imagine what this looked like and how unusual it was. And then something even more unusual happened. The Rebbe started to delivered a second discourse, which had never happened before and would only happen rarely over the next few decades. Okay, it's a nice story. What does it have to do with anything? It's a nice story. So who cares? All right, that's a nice story. Well, half a world away, there was another story that was taking place. Does anybody here know how Stalin died?
A heart attack.
Heart attack. Okay, yeah, close something.
Or a stroke. I don't know. I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
Massive stroke.
Right. Okay. Yeah. He had a stroke. Nothing. Okay, for a smoker with a lot of stress on him. Drank a lot. He was in his 70s already. Probably probably not in great health, as many autocrats tend not to be for some reason. Probably not that surprising. And you would imagine, as the leader of Russia, he probably got the best, most immediate medical attention, right?
Right.
You would think so. It's not what happened. Let's read the story. Should I It's actually very nicely written up in Wikipedia, if you ever. Yeah, here, let me share it. Okay, so this is not a conspiracy theory. This is not like from some sketchy kind of, this is like the official story of what went down with Stalin's death, okay? This is not a conspiracy. Let me just get it so I can see it properly. Come on, there you go. All right. On February 28th, 1953, remind me, when was Purim in 1953? Purim started on the night of February 28th, 1953. Okay, so here we are, February 28th, 1953, but in a different time zone, obviously, 6 or 7 hours ahead. Stalin and a small number of his inner circle, with all these, Khrushchev, Molotov, famous Molotov cocktail, which was not designed by Molotov, it was designed for Molotov to stop him, gathered together for an evening of entertainment and drinking. They were out in the, in a chalet somewhere, in the rural forest, whatever. The guests dispersed at approximately 4 a.m. So they had a nice, all these autocrats had a nice night of partying and drinking on March 1st. So this is in Russia, this is actually on Purim. And Stalin retired to his private quarters with strict instructions that he was not to be disturbed until people heard sounds that indicated that he was awake. Time passed and no sounds were heard throughout the day. So almost 24 hours later, at 11 p.m. the next night on March 1st, his housekeeper cautiously entered his room and found him lying on the floor wearing his pajamas and a shirt. He was unconscious, breathing heavily, incontinent, and unresponsive to attempts to rouse him. So that's at 11 p.m. When did he get to see a doctor? 7 a.m. the next day, a good 8 hours later. On March 2nd, medical experts were summoned to examine him. Interesting, right? So he's spent a long time without any medical attention because of him and also because of other people. Based on their examination, revealed a whole blood pressure problem. He had a stroke. I mean, we're not going to go into the details of this, but he died at almost at 10 p.m. on March 5th. So what the story indicates, this is right there on Wikipedia for anyone to read, the way it was written down. A lot of kind of, mysterious, a lot of coincidences happened here. He happened to be at this party, with these guys who probably don't like him very much. He happened to tell everyone not to bother him. Probably if he hadn't given that instruction, somebody might have intervened earlier, come and check on him in the morning, 10 o'clock, the comrade leader has not awoken yet. Let's just go check on him. But, God forbid you're going to be the one to open that door. If he said, under no circumstances should you bother me. So, there's that. And no medical attention. And the people who find him are kind of slow, they're not rushing to get him to the hospital exactly. Nobody's rushing there. I don't think we have to guess as to why. There's a lot of other stories and other legends about what happened there. I'm not going to go into them. They can't necessarily be substantiated, but they're interesting. There's some people who, have delivered stories more about exactly different things that happened, or I'm not going to go into it. But just the basic story, it's Purim in Russia. And at some point, if you look at the times, at some point during this time, this is when the Rabbi, at the same moment, while the Rebbe was having this Rebrangen, while the Rebbe was screaming, "Hoorah, he is wicked," in this kind of totally random and mysterious way with all the Hasidim in New York, you probably have, you have at that moment, Stalin is probably on the floor of his room And is he going to live or is he going to die? Is somebody going to walk in there? Are they going to get a medical attention or not? Is he going to survive this? Is the plot going to continue? It's all in the balance. It's all up in the air. But the Chassidim are all screaming, he is wicked, he is wicked. And this is all happening at the same time on Purim, in New York and in Russia. So what do we learn from that? Okay, let's feedback. What do we learn from this? What does this have to do with Purim? Parallels. Talk to me.
Well, it seems that that Stalin was plotting to eliminate all the Jews, albeit in a more subtle way than the Hitlerists. But that was his end game. That was his plan, and sounds a lot like what Haman was setting out to do.
Right. So we have these parallels between Haman, between Hitler, with Stalin as well. At this point, we have all these parallels coming up, and then there's kind of like, what is the threat? What is the message from all these stories? Right, when you're in a situation that seems impossible, it's not in your control anymore. There's a lot of things going on here that are not in our control.
Yeah.
But the only thing, there's God, and God has a plan, and we need to be clued into the spirituality maybe of what that is, and try to help that along. It doesn't mean that we can't do anything, but besides for giving the donations, besides for welcoming refugees, all things that are important to do in the real world, there's also a spiritual war going on. And the spiritual war is actually the primary war. That's actually the real and true battlefields where these battles are fought. And if we want to win the war, if we want to if we want to help people, we have to also fight the spiritual war. We can't ignore that. And so that's kind of with that, that concludes the history part. But in order to fight the spiritual war, to actually do something about it right now, I propose, if you'd like to do this with me now, and we can do this together. I have here the book, and I have the discourse. I'm not going to read through it. I'll give an abridged version of it, talk about some of the ideas, but I have here in front of me the discourse that the Rabbi said in 1953, the one he delivered, and the incredible ideas that he spoke about, and they're actually related, and you can connect them to this whole story, to Purim, to Stalin, to our response to it, to the spiritual war being fought. It's actually, this discourse speaks to those issues directly, and is really something that we can take in and understand here in an unbelievable way. So I'm going to give an abridged version. I'm just going to talk about some of the ideas for a few minutes. Unless we need, Rabbi, do we need an interlude? Rabbi Bernath, what do you think? Interlude, you want to?
No, I think it's great. I think please continue.
All right, we should just go with it. All right, plowing through it. All right. So this discourse, as it obviously was delivered in 1953, and then it was written down, transcribed. But the Rebbe would also sometimes take the transcriptions that were done of discourses that he delivered, and he would edit them and into a very precise, pristine form with exact grammar and everything exactly the way he wanted it. And then he would distribute those edited discourses. And so that was actually mostly in the late 80s and early 90s, that this happened. This specific discourse was edited in a few days before Purim and handed out a few days before Purim in 1991. Now, there's also significance to that date, right? What's the significance of February, March 1991? What happened in history? Who knows it? Let's go.
Iraq.
I'm Googling it.
Iraq, Saddam Hussein.
Of course, my dad knows. He's a history aficionado. I got it from somewhere. No, I'm nowhere near my dad's history prowess. Yeah, so the Gulf War of 1991 started on Purim. And so this discourse was handed out 2 or 3 days before the start of the Gulf War. Obviously, there was a lot of things that led up to the war. It was a very scary time in the world as well. Saddam Hussein, and it was a very scary time, and that's perhaps connected to this, why the Rebbe edited this specific discourse in 1991. And not only that, but a very specific, incredible threat to the Jews in 1991 was going on. If I don't know how old everyone is here, some people might be too young to remember it. I don't remember it. I was 3 years old in 1991, but something I've read about a lot. So whole kind of crazy situation, with Saddam Hussein invading Kuwait, and the United States invading, and there was this Saddam Hussein hated Israel very much and threatened to wipe Israel out, like many other people these days. And when the Gulf War started, he's like, all right, we're doing this, let's do it. He launched and he threatened doing this, and he followed through on that threat. A really, really scary time. There were people, it was all, it was kind of like people in Ukraine today. It was like that, like people, being bombarded. Israel, that was the feeling in Israel. People were literally refugees, like running away. Religious people asking the rabbi, can I fly out on Shabbats, because it's like a danger to live in Israel. 1991, Saddam Hussein, and he did it. He launched a large number of Scud missiles to Israel. Now, these are not missiles even that we see now. A Scud missile is big enough to go from Iraq to Israel. It's like it's a really and powerful enough to destroy a city block. So it's actually a kind of an armament which is maybe more powerful than what we're seeing now. And so yeah, really scary time for the Jewish people. And the really crazy thing is that the United States told Israel that they're not allowed to fight back against Iraq.
To retaliate.
Right? Because of escalation and et cetera. So obviously America was invading, they were going to take care of it, but Israel was not allowed to retaliate. So it was a really crazy situation. Throughout that whole situation, the Rebbe spoke about it a lot in a lot of different ways. And this discourse was part of that campaign about, talking about what was going on. And the Rebbe also said that Israel would be a safe place, and not a single person died in Israel.
Now, I think one person died. An older
One person
man
died of a heart attack. Right. One person died.
Man had a heart attack.
Right. But nobody died directly as a result of these missiles, even though they were, incredibly destructive. And people were scared of him firing biological or chemical weapons, gas masks. It was a really scary era. I mean, everybody had a gas mask in Israel. It was crazy. So that's the context for when this was edited and given out, this discourse, also kind of very much related. All right, so I'm just gonna, the discourse quotes the Megillah. Al ken karu liyamim ha'ela purim al shem Pur. At the end of the Megillah, one of the last verses of the Megillah, one of the last paragraphs, after you've read the ganze Megillah, as they say in Yiddish, the whole thing, quite at the end, you almost miss these things. The Megillah says why, this is why they, because of this, they called these days Purim. Why is it called Purim? Why did Mordechai and Esther and the leaders of the Jewish people at the time, they called this holiday, this new holiday that they instituted, Purim, Al Shem HaPur, because of the lottery, the casino game. What's that talking about? Well, it was related earlier in the Megillah that part of Haman's plan was to select the exact time when he would go after the Jewish people, when they would have the decree against the Jewish people, in order to select which day it was. For some reason, it's not explained clearly why. For some reason, he threw a dice. He threw a lot. He did a random kind of random number generator, whatever you want to call it. He didn't decide himself, and because of this, the holiday is called Purim. So obviously, this begs a lot of questions. This discourse asks a lot of these questions. Why are we naming the holiday after this seemingly insignificant detail in the story? I could think of a lot of better names. And not just that, but this part of the story is not a good part of the story. If you had to choose one little detail to name the story afterwards, you're talking about like Haman's plan. Like, it doesn't exactly evoke positive emotions, when you think about Haman's plan here. Yeah.
Was he looking for the most auspicious time to do it?
Possibly. I mean,
putting it up to a lottery would give him the most auspicious time to do it.
Perhaps, and we have, that could be a good explanation. We have to look at why. Why would a lottery be able to do that? So that's what that's what the discourse will get into. But just on the surface level, before we dig into it a little bit, it's very strange. Look at Hanukkah, another holiday that was rabbinic in origin that happened later on in Jewish history. The name Hanukkah has so many deep, beautiful layers to it. Hanukkah means the inauguration, because they re-inaugurated the temple. Also, Hanukkah, they rested on the 25th. Kafhe, Ka is 25. And the holiday starts on the 25th when the war ended. So, and many other beautiful hints in this name. And the word Hanukkah is a positive. It was the whole point of the holiday. The whole point of the war is that they rededicated the temple, and that's what it's named after. It makes a lot of sense. On Sukkot, you sit in a sukkah. On Shavuot is the culmination of the counting of 7 weeks, so it's called the Festival of Weeks. Pesach is for Chag HaMatzot, we eat matzah, and it's all about how God saved the Jewish people by jumping over their houses and not killing them and taking them out of Egypt. So okay, it's also a bit of a detail, but these are all positive, good, important things that happened on these holidays, and Purim is the outlier. Purim is bizarre. Why are we naming this incredibly joyous holiday after this dumb lottery that Haman did that we don't even understand why he did it? It actually implies that, if we follow the pattern, that the Jewish holiday is named after the main thing of the holiday, but the fact that they named it that, and that the Megillah consciously says this is why they named it that, and it explains it, seems to imply that, the actual miracle of Purim was the lot that Haman threw that landed on the month of Adar, which is the month of Ren, that's where Purim happened. That would actually appear to be the miracle of Purim, not anything else, not the story with Esther, and how she was selected as queen, and Mordecai, and everything that happened and all the coincidences that happened. That's not the miracle. It would actually seem that the central miracle of Purim is the lottery that Haman threw that landed on the month of Adar. That's what it would imply. It's very strange. So without going into the ins and outs of this discourse, it does quote one of the famous answers. There's this famous midrash on the Megillah that says that Haman was happy when the lot landed on Adar because he knew it was the month that Moses passed away. He figured that's a good sign. The midrash continues. He didn't realize that Moses died on his birthday, and the birthday can take care of the fact that he died that day, and he didn't realize that. Okay, fine, but doesn't necessarily help us answer the question. It's not because it's not about where the lot landed and it was on Adar. That's not what Purim means. It's the actual throwing of a lottery, something essentially connected. So to understand this is a really incredible idea. What is a lottery? What is the concept of throwing a lottery, of throwing doing something like that? It's connected to the idea of randomness. right?
Chance.
Randomness, which is that's a whole idea for itself. Okay, what is randomness? Randomness, very hard to talk about what randomness is. Like, if you think about it philosophically or scientifically, we live officially in a deterministic, predictable universe with laws, right? So where does randomness have a place? It's a mind-boggling concept, because on the one hand, randomness implies that there are no rules anymore, right? On the other hand, right, so much of science is underpinned on randomness. As a matter of fact, randomness is the concept which underpins what we call the materialistic worldview. So the materialistic worldview is actually very much part of this story, because that is the worldview of a lot of these evil people. The idea that we live in this world, and what we see in front of us and the material we see in front of us is the entire sum total of the meaning of this world, of the point of it. And there's nothing that we can't see that exists. That's called scientism or materialism. That was actually the official philosophy of the Soviet Union, pretty much. That's what everybody believed. That was like the required thing. Religion was persecuted against. Like, if you were considered to believe in fantasy, they made fun of you. They're like, we are educated now. We know how we came here. There's no spirituality in the world. Like that was the education, the indoctrination of communism. They laughed at. They thought all this kind of stuff was funny. They believed in this kind of pure materialism, that the only thing, if you think about it, if you dig into communism, Marxist philosophy, and until today, actually, this whole class fight, this whole class war, class struggle, on the one hand, okay, fine, being, oppressed by people who are powerful and, different classes and all that. Okay, fine, makes a lot of sense. We have to, if anything, the prophets and the Torah, went, talked the same way to some extent, right? So, okay, fine, fair enough. But it's taken to an extreme where it's like, that's all there is. The only thing worth fighting for is my own material advantage. That's what that's the extreme to which the idea of class struggle is taken. And this hatred of the wealthy, because the only thing in this worldview, the only thing that I would possibly want for myself is more material wealth. And that's the thing that I should struggle for. And the people who've taken it from me, are the ultimate evil. That's the philosophy that underpins the whole, kind of Marxism thing. And that is the, I'll get political for a second. Maybe some people will be upset. I don't know if I'll get political here for a second, but, into modern times, I've just been studying, Vladimir Putin a little bit and trying to understand him, and, he very lived in, he was born in 1953 or 1952. He was born a few months before Stalin died. He grew up, in that world. And I think that's his philosophy towards life, despite, trying to be all friendly with religion, which they're doing in Russia now, and whatever it is. That I believe that actually his personal philosophy towards life is very much one of pure materialism. And it helps explain a lot of what's going on now. And kind of, his disregard for things, like he doesn't believe there's any consequences for anything that he does. And, just his personal power and gain is the only thing that matters. That's what I can tell. And there's no spirituality there. There's none, as far as I can see. So not a lot of people know this. He is actually the wealthiest person on the planet by far. I don't know if anybody here heard about this or know about that. I think Andrew's still here. Andrew would know about that. Or my dad, but yeah, he has an estimated wealth of more than $200 billion. Claudia.
Actually, I have a question because of your speech.
Sure.
What it will be the difference between Putin and someone who has no spirituality? I grow up in Romanian, so I know the communist speech, whatever.
Mhm.
What I mean is, what it will be the difference between him and the other personage in history that believes that he's chosen by God to do this? You know, so
Mhm.
I think that is the same shape of mental health. I
Yeah.
don't know. Is that it's just because you said that is not because he's doing this, just because he's not spiritual, you know?
Sure. Yeah, because there is a lack of spirituality doesn't mean a person's evil. Doesn't make a person evil, right? It's just kind of like
I didn't say this. I just asked what is the difference between him and another personage in history that he was asking the same thing, but he
sure.
was doing it in the name of God.
Sure. Okay, I'll answer your question. This is my opinion, my understanding. I'll tell you. This is my personal understanding of history and something I've spent a lot of time about. I'll tell you what they have in common and what the differences are. Okay, so what somebody who is, the people in history who were inspired by spirituality or religion to do, crimes, to do terrible things, what they have in common with the people like Stalin or whatever you want to talk about is it's called psychopathy and narcissism and Machiavellianism. So these are called the dark, psychology is, talks about these things. This is called the dark triad of personality traits. So
Sorry,
that
so they have some evil in it.
so yeah. They're a kind of a spiritual philosophy isn't necessarily enough to it's a person has to be a psychopathy, which is the lack of what's the word,
Empathy.
compassion. Yeah, the lack of compassion, the lack of empathy for somebody else. Narcissism, so complete focus on self to the exclusion of all others, and Machiavellianism, a belief that the ends justify the means to achieve any goals. So you can do anything to achieve your goals. Nothing can stop you. There's a complete lack of idea of morality or lines that can't be crossed. So those three things are what those are all the evil people in history, and all the evil, probably if you know real evil people in your life, smaller oppressors, smaller evil people, they probably have those three traits. And if you meet some of those three traits, you should turn around and walk the other way and never go back. That's called the dark triad. The thing is, though, so where so people with those traits and who very often get into positions of leadership, unfortunately. Even today, many leaders and CEOs are, have many psychopathic traits. It's a well-studied thing. It's not necessarily a bad thing either. It's only when combined with everything else. It can actually be helpful for leadership in a strange way, but that's, a whole other subject. The difference that comes out, though, is that the evil people who did bad things in history were kind of constrained by the grander morality of the society around them. So spirituality implies no matter what, even if you're doing evil things in the name of religion or spirituality, there's still kind of this idea of human dignity, of souls, of answering for your deeds that perhaps would limit some of the barbarity, at least to some extent. So there was still kind of like still certain, very little, but just enough kind of idea of dignity maybe left to prevent things from getting as bad as they did in the 20th century. In the 20th century, you had these traits, leaders with these terrible traits, combined with kind of the elimination of any kind of spirituality, which caused a lot of the same things, but on a scale unprecedented. Maybe you could argue it's because we had the technology to do it. There was more people in the world, but some of the things that were done, in the 20th century, the worst crimes happened in these regimes where obviously you had evil leaders who had these traits, but also where any, idea of spirituality had been, completely stamped out or replaced with paganism. So, the Nazis, for example, basically were pagans. And then communism was basically, like I was saying, officially kind of atheist. And this freed the leaders, to make things even worse. That there was really no boundaries and nothing that could stop them. There was no God above them anymore. So, evil people could do even more evil things in that kind of societal context, and nobody would stop them. So anyway, there's a lot of ways to poke holes in that argument. There's a lot of, it's a whole, it's a discussion. There's a lot of different ways of looking at history, but I think that at least to some extent, I believe that's true. I think that that was a factor, in it. So does that answer your question, Claudia? What do you think?
Actually, I don't have the same opinion, but it's okay. You shared your opinion.
Yeah. Like I said, there's a lot of different ways of understanding it, and I'm sure it's a gray area, and I'm sure there's some.
And communist propaganda, it was not about religion, because, of course, it was not like the Russians in Romania, but the religion was prohibited because it's supposed to be just one religion. It's supposed to be just their propaganda. You cannot have two idols, or you cannot have two principles. So actually it's normal that they interdict, one way of thinking just to be able to implement the other way of thinking.
Yeah.
But again, the people with the same propaganda, solidarity, equity, equality, it was the same. It was like Jewish, Christian, Muslim propaganda. It is the same. It's just that they replace it.
I don't know if I would agree with that. Okay, I don't know if I would agree with that. The theological ideas kind of being equivalent to that. It's not. I don't think so.
A lot of people was sold. I grew up in a free mind family, but a lot of people were sold because of the propaganda. Yeah. Of course, that the elite, they gain material things for themselves, but the propaganda for the people, it was, a beautiful propaganda. That the reality was different. It's something else.
Absolutely, yeah, they did an incredible job. But we're kind of agreeing in a way that the point of it was you can't worship a god anymore. You need to worship, something else.
Because they needed to substitute, otherwise you cannot. But this happened in history, during the history, when you not worship another god, you choose another god. So when it was a change of, not of regime in that time, but of religion, let's say, they did the same, in my opinion. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, I mean, no, there's some similarities.
It's called the cult of personality.
Right. The cult of yeah. But
the leaders became substituted for a god. Stalin.
Yeah. Let's talk about Catholics. They have a Pope that have the red phone, and they have Inquisition, and they have Cruciad, and after what I meant is it's larger than this, because you put Putin and the communist regime in just one side, that I think that doesn't cover exactly my comprehension.
Sure, yeah. I mean,
you cannot just put it in this box, what I want to say.
Right. Well, yeah, there are similarities, like my father said, have this idea of a cult of personality. It's nothing new. What I think made, though, the Soviet Union, the reason why I put it like something that made it a little bit more dangerous is that it didn't come with any, the official philosophy that was being switched over to was, really materialism. And, the reasons for that are that, that wasn't really possible up until the 20th century. We didn't have scientific tools to develop a fully materialistic philosophy that made sense. There was no, until the recent, the past few hundred years, until the Enlightenment, there wasn't really a way to explain the world without talking about anything, religious or spiritual, or very rarely. Maybe the Greeks, had some of that to some extent, but not very much. It didn't really, you couldn't really explain the world. But in the 20th century, with what I'm going to get to, the idea of randomness actually led to this. You had a way of talking about and explaining the world, that the world is not directed by any higher power. And you could actually, say that and really make a sensible argument for that to millions of people and make that the official state religion, that there is no religion, which it just wasn't possible to do earlier. And while the mechanics of it, like you're pointing out, Claudia, are very similar to what was done previously, the content of it was something new. That's something that had not really been done before on such a large scale. And that's, I hope that kind of puts it together. So, but I'll just get to the idea here. The idea underpinning the materialist philosophy is randomness, right? So if you say, okay, so if God didn't create the world, then who did? We say, well, there's just random quantum fluctuations, right? And it's called the quantum foam, and there's random fluctuations, and these fluctuations created, just billions of universes. And randomly, eventually, our very orderly universe kind of happened randomly, because if you play with the numbers long enough, you'll get a universe with all the right universal constants and the right kind of physics where you can have order like we have. So order arose out of randomness, out of chaos. And then, okay, fine. Then the same thing happened with the formation of, all the celestial bodies and, the orderly galaxies. It was just random. And then randomly, there was, a bunch of chemicals got together and they kind of randomly formed, amino acids, which randomly started to combine in different ways. And eventually, with enough time, with enough randomness, there was life all of a sudden. And then that life randomly genetically evolved until it got more advanced, until here we are today with an orderly, world where we have life and, different kinds of life in the world, which, it's all based on randomness. Without randomness, there's no, this idea doesn't exist. So it's an incredibly powerful idea, and it's actually very hard to do. For example, a computer, I don't know if you know this, computers cannot generate random numbers on their own. So for companies that do, that do information security, or hacking or cryptology, that need to generate random numbers, they have all kinds of wacky, hilarious kind of ways they do it. But a computer on its own can't generate a truly random number, because there'll always be an algorithm for how it's doing it. So one company actually has an entire wall of lava lamps. And they take pictures of the lava lamps, and there's this, every pixel represents a number, and they do this whole math thing, and the lava lamps create randomness. If you go to randomnumbergenerator.org, which we use sometimes to do draws and stuff, it uses like random atmospheric things in the air. So a computer can actually generate randomness on its own. Just a little tidbit. So randomness is this incredibly powerful idea, which underpins this kind of really, is the underpinning of a materialist philosophy. Haman actually, was very much this materialist as well, right? Who Haman was obsessed with wealth and power, and he, this whole plan involved money. He was going to steal the Jews' money and give it with the king and get more power, and he needed everyone to bow to him. He needed everyone to idolize him. It's literally in the Megillah. We have these kind of stories. He was a megalomaniac, just like all these other guys that we're talking about. It's just a little scary. Alexei Navalny, who was poisoned and imprisoned in modern Russia by Putin. The last video he made, it's an hour and 50 minutes. I don't know if you can watch the whole thing. There's an English version of it. He exposed that Putin has a $1 billion palace. It's absolutely incredible. And it just kind of scared me. I see when this materialism, like, oh my God, like, this is real. This place really exists. It's incredible. Okay, Claudia, go ahead. Claudia.
Actually, what I want to mention, because you talk about philosophy, and the first reason that the intellectuality it was killed when the communists come, this in each country, it was because you want to kill the people who, distribute ideas.
Yeah.
Others that the newer. So first of all, you get rid of those ones. So it was what they did, but I'm not pretty sure, but I will stop here because it's better to listen where you want to go, because I'm not pretty sure either that, the philosophy of the communist and the Putin philosophy and whatever he grew up in, or the communist philosophy, it is materialist, because like I told you, I don't know, it's the propaganda and the feeling of the people, the fact that he was from the beginning to the elite of the communists, that he grew up there and he was part of security service, and he grew up like a elite, like others grew up in elite in capitalism, let's say, that he think that he have the privilege to do everything, and everything and everyone should be there just to pleasure him. I don't think that it's so much differ with others' mentality. I really don't.
Yeah,
but
there's a lot of people like that. It's not just him.
I just got.
Yeah, no, you're right. There's a lot of people like that. It's not just him. It's it's always going to exist. I think that the philosophical idea of capitalism is to take that energy and to harness it, right, and to try to do something positive with it. That's the goal of capitalism, and that's one of the reasons why it helped a lot of people. Historically, capitalism took a lot of people out of poverty because it harnessed the kind of greedy energy. You could be really greedy materialist, and it harnesses that energy that you'll actually, at least partially, do something hopefully productive and good with it, and something that will end up benefiting other people. So that being said, though, even in every system, in every place, in every world, there's people like that. I mean, you meet people like that who are just, that exists. And it needs to be kind of controlled, and it needs to be kind of put into a little bit of a box where it's under control and has limits. But when someone loses those limits, then they have $1 billion palace and they invade the country next door because they feel like it. Whatever. I shouldn't be getting too overtly political here. I'm a rabbi, right? But I can't stop myself sometimes. Anyway, but yeah, I agree with you 100% that these people do kind of exist everywhere, and
I'm not pro Putin, by the way. Just
no, I know. That's clear. Yeah, I know. I'm just saying in general. I'm not supposed to get too political. Rabbi Bernath gets uncomfortable. Just sharing my opinions here as a personal guy, as my own personal opinions. But anyway, so what was I? Yeah. So we start to see this pattern, and there's actually a name for it. Okay, so these kind of these people who have tried to persecute the Jewish people, tried to destroy them, and they actually have a name. The name is Amalek. Amalek, and that's why on the Shabbat before Purim we read there's a mitzvah to destroy Amalek. Amalek is considered to be the greatest evil in the world. Amalek was a nation that existed in when the Jews left Egypt. They were the first to attack us, and then they were almost wiped out in the times of King Saul. He nearly wiped them out, but he let the king survive. And Amalek is it's really extreme. The Torah says you have to remember to wipe them out. It's a positive mitzvah to destroy Amalek, and we actually fulfill that mitzvah by reading that mitzvah in the Torah on the Shabbat before Purim, or on Purim itself. We read a similar passage. So very, very unusual. The Torah is all about redeeming and tshuva, which means redemption, and and saving people, and repentance and change, and it's not it's very extreme language. We don't see that, but there's this idea this idea of Amalek is this kind of evil that you can't, it's the ultimate evil, you can't do anything with it. The only answer is that it just has to be stopped, it has to be destroyed. So when somebody starts getting Amalek, that's what happens, it just has to be destroyed. That's what happened to Haman, that's what happened to Stalin. And you know, it didn't happen in the first Gulf War, but it happened in the second Gulf War. You know, Saddam Hussein also got that treatment as well. Yeah, I don't know if he's on the same status as those guys. Hitler, you know, Amalek, it's very much associated. And so Haman in the Megillah is actually called Agagi, which is the king of Amalek was called Agag, and he is called an Agagite, an Amalekite. And so he's very much going along with that concept. So philosophically, Amalek has the same numerical value as Safek, which means doubt, because the idea is that the materialist philosophy causes doubts in one's faith. That's also connected to it. And this all comes back to the idea of randomness. So well, just to finish, because it's getting late, this is all the background to everything. The actual central idea of this discourse is that so randomness is a powerful spiritual idea, and randomness happens when you have when you have two things that are the same, and there's no way to decide between them, or three things, or four things, or whatever it is. So, right, it has to be, everything has to be equal. So if you do a lottery, whether you're rich or poor, whether you're black or white, whatever you believe, when there's a lottery, there's an equal chance for everybody to win. Everybody's the same. Everything's equalized. If you throw a die, or if you throw dice, there has to be an equal chance for it to fall on any side. They all have to be the same. If there's a weight, if anything's different, then it's no longer a lottery. Then it's cheating. A true lottery is truly random, which means there has to be this perfect equality of outcome for any particular outcome, perfect equality of chance. So that's the definition of randomness. The definition of randomness is that any of the given outcomes is possible. That's what randomness really means. Anything is equally as possible as any other. There's no favor for this one or for that one. That's what true randomness is. True randomness essentially is the idea you need to ignore the specific merits or lack thereof of all the different outcomes. So you actually have to turn the brain off. The idea of chokhmah, the idea of wisdom, which is the highest idea of spirituality, the idea of discrimination, you have to completely turn it off. It actually transcends that. You have to, there's no evaluation. There's no, this is better than that and evaluate. None of that. It transcends all of that. So it kind of reaches a place where it's kind of beyond intellect. Not only is it beyond intellect, but it's also beyond, in Hasidic thought, there's, part of this is true in the divine realm and true in the psychological realm. There's something above intellect, which is called will. The things that we want or the things that we have pleasure in are also kind of considered to be beyond intellect. If you enjoy something, there's no explanation for that. It's just the way it is. If you want something, it's understood that we want things just because, and there isn't really an intellectual explanation for that. So the understanding in Hasidic thought is that will and pleasure are faculties that we have, which are, super rational. They transcend our rational minds, and our rational minds basically justify and go along with the things that we find pleasure in and the things that we want. And they actually shape, because they transcend our rational mind. They shape our rationality. So our rationality is not truly rational. So the lottery actually transcends those concepts as well, because you can't, in a lottery, you can't want this or want that. That's not random. So the idea of will, which is more powerful and higher and really transcends intellect, also doesn't take place. So you can't choose something based on your intellect. You can't choose in a lottery, and you also can't choose something just because you want it. For no, I just, pick a number from 1 to 20. Well, I just like the number 12. I just want the number 12. No, that's not random. So we're also going beyond that in terms of the concept here of randomness of a lottery. So Haman was actually onto something. Haman was actually doing something very smart. He was saying, okay, the Jewish people are the chink in the armor of materialism. Constant reminder that, I can't really enjoy things because, it's the materialism isn't the real thing. They're the chink in the armor. I'm going to try to beat them at their own game. He looked at Jewish history. God protected them. But that doesn't really make any sense, does it? God's really great. God can't really care about anything, can he? Does that really make sense? Let's think about it for a second. God is infinite. Does infinite care about anything? In mathematics, if you have infinite dollars, then mathematically, there's no difference between $1 and $1 million from the perspective of infinite dollars. They're all infinitely far away. So from the perspective of true infinity, he reasoned, everything is just random. Nothing really matters. It's just random, meaningless. So he reasoned very intelligently, if I'm going to beat the Jewish people, then I need to access this, God, what God really thinks, so to speak. I need to access God's real infinity. I need to access his true being, and do the lottery. So that was the plan. That was the idea of the lottery. And what he didn't know, this is the conclusion of the discourse, what he didn't realize is that there's actually something higher than a lottery. There's the deepest level within ourselves, and also the deepest level within, the divine sphere, which in Hasidic understanding are parallel to each other. Our own psychological selves are images of, God. It says that in the Torah, man is made in the image of God. So we can see parallels within how we are made in our own souls to God. Otherwise we wouldn't be able to understand him at all. So there's this deeper idea than the lottery, which is called free choice, or bechira in Hebrew. And the idea of free choice is that if you're choosing randomly any number between 1 and 20, so fine, you can't explain why any number is better than any other number, and you can't really have, I like this number, I want this number. But there's this power that the soul has to be able to choose something. So, and for no other reason than the soul has chosen it. So the concept requires a lot of elaboration and explaining, what makes it different, what makes it special. But that idea of free choice, that's actually, we talk about, if you ever heard debates about free choice, that's actually what the debate is. Is it really possible to make a free choice that's not encumbered by the intellect or any other part of you which is forcing you to make that choice? Another deep, kind of another major philosophy to go into. And so the idea of bechira, the idea of choice, is that, even when there's nothing forcing you to make a choice, it doesn't have to be random. You can actually make a choice based on your true self, based on the deepest part of yourself, based on your essence. And that's the kind of choice that when we say that God chose the Jewish people, that's the kind of choice that we're talking about. And that's what Haman didn't understand. The choice that God made of the Jewish people to care for, protect them, and to have a relationship with them was a choice that transcended randomness, and a choice that transcended, the lottery that he was trying to do. It was a choice based on God's deepest essence. And that's kind of the mystery of Purim. How is that possible? How is it possible for us to do that? And how is it possible for, to speak that way about God? That, from God's essence, he actually chooses us beyond everything else. That Haman was wrong, that God really does care. that infinite really does care. Well, it's a long subject. It's something to think about and meditate on for a long time. I'm not going to take it, it's getting late here. If anybody wants to farbrang about it, we can farbrang about it. But that is the true great mystery of Purim. And that is the true beauty of Purim, is trying to understand that idea. And when you try to understand that idea, how that's possible, when you try to really get it, inevitably, you're going to want to get drunk, because there's no other way to get it. You can't get it. You have to you have to go out of yourself. There's to try to understand that. You have that's this whole thing, ad yada, until you can't tell the difference between Haman and Mordechai. Nothing makes sense anymore. That's the only way you're ever going to possibly be able to get to understand this idea. And so that's why that's why Purim is the crazy holiday that it is, with drinking and everything's upside down and everything's wild. And it's also why there's a lot of humor, because humor is based on spontaneity of the soul, the soul doing something spontaneous and random. That's actually what humor is. Humor is kind of surprise, and the ability of us that we can surprise each other with, there's a lot of depth to humor, but a lot of power in it, actually. It's another whole subject, but humor also expresses this idea of spontaneity, of randomness, and also very deep connectedness to the soul. And that's why it's the one day when we have humor and jokes and practical jokes, and that's all a wonderful mitzvah in Purim, when it's very much frowned upon the rest of the year, right, Bernath? Very much frowned upon. It's the one day when the rabbi gets up there in a crazy hat and, drinks himself under the table. What's going on? This is what's going on. So I hope that this helps us understand Purim and how it's connected to these days, how there is hope. Everything seems really dark. We've been in bad situations like this before. Ukraine has one of the largest, most incredible Jewish communities. The largest, Jewish community building in the world is located in Dnipro, and probably more Jews than Canada, and rabbis and shluchim and Jewish institutions, huge. And it's very hard for us what's going on. Not to mention what's actually happening in Russia is also kind of, many Jews and communities living there. And I don't imagine that they're terribly happy about this and that they can do anything to stop it. And there's, crackdowns, and you can't say a word. They carry you off. The police just come and carry people off now. And you can't say a word about it. So really a hard situation for all the good people out there. So with all that in mind, though, we have Purim. We have to be joyful, because we know that there's something that we don't really understand that really transcends our understanding, and but ultimately that God's with us, and He's proven it over and over again, and we believe it will be this way, and we believe it. And the more we focus on that, the more we're joyful, and we're have the right attitude, then we actually bring it out into the open, we actually reveal it. And so that's how we will fight the spiritual battle, is by opposing, by being good people, by being people who see beyond the material, by being people who show that to other people, and create the energy of which is not just based on materialism and not just based on narcissism, but by believing that God really wants us to be the best people we can, and that actually cares about us being the best people we can, and that there is something more to the world than just the material. That's how we fight the spiritual battle against what's going on, and that's what Purim's all about. So anyway, sorry I spoke for so long. I really there's no other way to just give over all those ideas. But feel free to farbrang, take out a l'chaim, because with that we end the main part of this class. Hope you enjoyed. Feel free to give me some feedback. I know somebody here wasn't happy, which is okay.